Good morning, everyone. I'm Sudaroli from Prajnya. I welcome each one of you to this Prajnya Gender Talk series. So I also welcome Vijeta Kumar, today's speaker. She's she's the assistant professor, English department of Saint Joseph University. She teaches communicative English um, at the university and writes about films, books, food, caste, and teaching. And her writings has appearance in outlets that include First Post, India Today, The Lady's Finger, and Deccan Herald. And she regularly blogs also. I think she's quite familiar in the Twitter space as well. And I thank you her for taking time to come here, because I was we want them to be here in our space to talk the equality colloquium series, but then we got her in the Gender Talk. So thank you for your valuable time, Vijeta. And she's going to, today's topic is freedom and its prices, caste and beyond. And I mean, it's a need of the hour, and as always. So over to you, Vijeta.
Yeah. Thank you.
And she's going to talk about half an hour to 45 minutes, and then we can take up questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Sudarli. And thank you, Prajna Trust, for organizing this and inviting me. When the theme was first proposed for freedom and its relationship with caste, I wasn't exactly sure how to chart it out, because it's a very tricky concept, because over the last decade, I think, because of how easy it became on social media for Dalit and Bhujan people to craft a voice of their own and have opinions and be taken seriously. It also ensured that some part of the things that weren't easy to talk about earlier became easy to talk about now. But it also meant that it put a lot of pressure on some people to talk all the time, which meant that even though those of us who didn't want to end up becoming spokespeople for the community ended up becoming. But I'm not speaking from the point of view of the spokesperson here. I don't believe I represent the entire community. I can only speak for myself, and I can only speak for my experiences, which is why whenever there is a talk about caste or freedom or feminism, I only talk about it from the point of view and from the purview of within my own experience. I can't pretend to talk for everybody else. It's not only dishonest, it also doesn't make sense. I think the idea of freedom is a particularly tricky one when we think about it in terms of caste, because I was reading Frederick Douglass's narrative earlier last month, and a colleague brought an essay written by Frederick Douglass, in which he mentioned, so Frederick Douglass was a man who, one among the first people to have escaped slavery and write about it. He wrote his way out of things that were keeping him behind. He escaped slavery, so to speak. But when we talk about escape in that way, we're always talking about it in terms of leaving something behind and going ahead. But it's very important to remember that for people who do it for the first time without any template or without any precedent, they have no idea what they're getting into. They only have an awareness, I think, of what they're leaving behind. And this is something that shows up in his writing again and again. he made a very strong point in one of his earlier works. He said he'd escaped slavery and found himself alone without it, outside of it, but he wasn't able to recognize the freedom that escaping slavery brought for him, because he had been held captive for so long that slavery had begun to feel like home. And now when he no longer was a slave, he didn't know what to do. And people may say that this isn't really how it works, or escaping slavery is a huge thing and you must be responsible for the freedom you have, etc., etc. But I think what Douglas is referring to here is a sense of not knowing how, if you've built your entire life as a resistance against something or somebody, as a fight for your own survival, when you no longer have to fight anybody, you may not know what to do with your life anymore. And I think it's such a poignant, sensitive, and very sharp observation about surroundings and your own self. This is something that I've been thinking about ever since I read that. What do you do with, the most dangerous thing here is also the idea that captivity had begun to feel like home. And this idea that you don't have to think about yourself because somebody else is going to decide your fate, your occupation, your life is very scary. And not that we give up and we are very comfortable with our idea, but I think it presents the idea of slavery and captivity in terms of permanence of a certain kind, in terms of what it can do to somebody's idea of the self. When you're left alone, then you definitely have to confront yourself. But then what do you do with this feeling of having found home in slavery and then not having it any longer? I think it was very, very brave of Douglas to have presented this thought in such a manner, because this is something that not many of us do think about when we think about freedom or caste, or being held captive and then letting ourselves loose and escaping. I think so much of the energy goes into documenting the escape. We are left with nothing after the escape to even begin to think of a journey after the escape. I'm more interested in what happens to people not during the journey of escape, but after the escape. So in very similar ways, what does freedom mean to people who leave villages, who try to leave caste behind and enter cities or professions or jobs where they're the first ones to build a life for themselves and their family? That's why I said it's a tricky concept. The price that people pay for freedom and continue to pay to keep the freedom is a huge one, obviously, but it's to make the concept a little more complicated. I'd like to sort of give you the example of my own relationship with the idea of feminism. When I first encountered the idea of feminism, it seemed not shocking. It seemed completely natural that such a thing should exist, because these were all questions that I've had as a child, and to find these questions in other women's minds also was a kick of sorts. I called myself a feminist and spent the next couple of years calling myself a feminist, not doing any of the work that I thought traditionally women had to do, because I thought that was a way of being a feminist, where I reject the roles that women had to do. I think I was about 18 or 17 years old, and there was a festival at home. And like it is customary, the men sit in the dining hall or in the hall, and the women bring out the food and lay it for the men. And because I had newly discovered that I was a feminist, I told everybody that I won't be bringing food. I'll be sitting with the men in the hall. Because I think that was my idea of, of coming out to the world as a feminist. So I sat with the men and watched all the women bring the food inside, my mother, my grandmother, my sisters, my aunts. What should have felt like freedom felt very stupid. It didn't feel like freedom at all. I had reversed the role for about 5 minutes, but I started feeling very guilty. I started feeling guilty because not because I was enjoying food when other women were sort of toiling and bringing the food for all of them, but I felt guilty. I think because what I thought would give me some sense of satisfaction um, ended up making me feel very ridiculous and out of place. Um, it I thought it would feel like freedom, and I don't know what I expected to feel. So I'm very curious about what this 17-year-old girl wanted out of that one exchange reversal of role. Was she expecting to suddenly develop wings and fly? Was she expecting to suddenly feel like a man? So at that point, I had to confront, does feeling free mean feeling like a man? And these were questions that just kept becoming more and more complicated, and I just really couldn't answer them in any way. 10 years later, I realized that feminism wasn't enough to answer all these questions I had. I was growing up on a steady diet of Western feminism, French feminism, which meant that the feminism and the theory and the narratives of feminism that I was reading really hadn't confronted caste in any real manner. Because the idea, the concept of caste didn't seem to exist in that version of feminism. And because Indian feminists had borrowed much of this from the West, their relationship with caste was negligible. They didn't think to look at it. And because I was also growing up on this, it didn't occur to me that this is a problem. The second big question for me came when I started revolting against my father, because I thought that's what feminists should do. That's what good feminists do, that they revolt against their fathers and brothers and refuse to make tea and things like that. What I am talking about here may seem very petty and insignificant, but I think that I think young women who begin to think about feminism need to be taken very seriously, because they are doing it much more vigorously, and they're thinking about it more vigorously than women in their 40s and 50s. Because they have just started noticing how unfair and unjust the home situation is, or the work situation is. And it's there that young minds are sort of being the irritation that young women feel at workplaces or in festivals at home is an irritation that's deeply important. It's much more important than reading 60-year-old women's theories about feminism. And I find great joy in sitting with young women and talking to them about what irritates them, what annoys them. So this revolt against fathers and brothers couldn't accommodate the idea of dealing with Dalit men inside of feminism. And this is why I found Indian feminism to be very, very blind. It was blind to caste because it couldn't imagine what kinds of prices had to be paid for the freedom of, let's say, a Dalit man. Because the Dalit man's freedom was not the Indian feminists' problem. Or even the Dalit woman's freedom wouldn't be her problem for a long time. But yeah, so this is the thing. So when I revolted against my father, refused to make him tea because I thought I was a feminist, I was not fully looking at my father as a Dalit man. I was only looking at him as a man. And would I have made him more cups of tea if I had discovered that he was a Dalit man earlier? No. But it complicates our own relationship with feminism when caste enters the picture. And I don't think that complication should scare us anymore. We like being complacent inside this laziness where we can only deal with one problem at a time. And that doesn't necessarily fetch any kind of freedoms. I think it's at this point that I encountered one acceptable definition of freedom, which is to think and to have the courage to conduct this process of thinking on a daily basis. To think is not as free as many people assume it is. Because when we are thinking, we are actively using our minds to look and to pay attention. And I think this is, in some sense, the beginning of a freedom. When I started looking at my family members, my father, my mother, especially, not just based on gender, but also based on caste, it slapped one part of my mind into being awake, and that kind of awakeness is also a kind of freedom. Which brings me to the third point, the state of being awake. I really enjoy Toni Morrison's essay, this essay that she calls On Dreaming. It's a commencement speech she gave at a university in America. And here she's telling young girls and young boys to not stop dreaming. She says there are two kinds of dreams. One is a dream that you get in the middle of a sleep. The other is a dream that you can dream with your eyes open. And she says both kinds of dreams are very, very important, because it's through those dreams that you can truly conceive what freedom looks like for you. She says that sometimes people have been shamed for dreaming too much, because when you dream, you're unavailable to other people. I like this concept of dreaming because in all the stories that we read as young children, the sense of freedom was felt acutely only in a dream. I don't know if it's the children's stories or the stories of animals and panchatantra and things like that, but somehow the idea of running away, or the idea of freedom came acutely, meaning it was realized better in dreams than it was realized in real life. In real life, honestly, I don't know what to do with the freedom. I can only dream about the things that I'll do once I have the freedom. And this is one of the biggest tricking things about the quality of freedom, that you won't know what to do once you have it. Here, I'll give you another example. This is from the Enid Blyton's writing of Famous Five, Secret Seven, and all those books. A friend of mine was always very curious about why these children in Famous Five and Secret Seven, etc., they don't seem to have parents, or they don't seem to have parents who care about their children, because the children are always off to doing adventures and the parents don't care. So she said, this is very strange. I won't know what I'll do if my parents would ever leave me alone like that. And that got me thinking about what I wanted most when I was young, when I was 16 or 17. What I wanted most was to run away from home. And this is why the taste of freedom in my tongue is only a dream, because I thought that you can only taste freedom if you worked hard for it. If it's given to you on a plate, then that's not freedom. I'm talking about it in terms of how freedom is talked about and experienced among various people. A young girl, a young boy, a Dalit man, an older Dalit man, an older Dalit woman, etc. So my dream was to run away from home and then experience freedom. But I never had the chance to run away. I still live with my parents. I'm 35 years old. I feel free, but somehow I feel that the freedom that I have right now is not mine. It's not something that I can do things. And this bothers me quite a bit. What is it that prevents us from doing things with freedom? Which brings me to the next point. I'm sorry if it's all scattered, but I think I'm hoping to arrive at something that can connect all the dots in the last 5 minutes of my talk. The other thing about freedom is also what stories of people running away can do to your idea of freedom and of yourself. There is a book by K.R. Meera called Kabar, which was translated by Nisha Susan from Malayalam to English. And in it, there was this story that I read, that a woman who was trapped in a very, very bad marriage of 28 years read K.R. Meera's Kabar and decided to leave her husband. And I was very kicked with this news. And apparently journalists went and interviewed this woman and said, what prompted you in this book to leave your husband like that? And in the book, there is a woman, a married woman, who is a working woman. And when she's getting back home one night, she sees an injured dog on the road. And she takes the injured dog home. And the husband puts up a fit. And he says, I don't like dogs. How can you bring an injured dog home? I don't have the patience to deal with this. You have to bring him out. And so she decides to leave the husband because she wants to take care of the injured dog. And she says, no, I'm taking the dog and I'm leaving you. And she leaves. Although inconceivable that an Indian woman can leave her husband for an injured dog. And you know how people say things like, all of this only happens in films or books. But this woman who was trapped in a 28-year-old bad marriage decided to leave her husband because of a piece of fiction. And that's like the sweetest thing I've ever read. That somebody has read something in a book and decided, I can touch it, and then has decided to go and do it for themselves. And that's, I think, the most stunning quality of freedom, that when written in fiction, it can do such real, mind-bendingly mad things. That this woman was able to feel the power of K.R. Meera's words in a book, in a piece of fiction. It was not even somebody's autobiography. It was a piece of fiction. And somebody's life written in fiction has made a real woman leave her real husband, not even for an injured dog, just because it's a bad marriage and she didn't want to deal with it anymore. That, I think, is the best quality of freedom. And that's why I continue to think that now this I'm speaking from an entirely personal point of view. I think more than biography, autobiography, politics, revolution, protest, identity, what has made me free today, if I can call myself free in any way, if I associate freedom to anything, it's fiction. Reading fiction has filled me with a tremendous capacity to imagine what freedom is like in my hands. I feel like I can touch freedom when I read fiction. And I'll give you more and more examples of what I mean by this. And when I say fiction, I'm using the term very loosely. Reading is freedom, obviously. Now, I'll give you one example for how reading a non-fiction story of somebody made me touch that freedom. I'm here talking about now Sujata Gidla's memoir called Ants Among Elephants. Sujata Gidla is in New York. She's a subway conductor and she's this tremendously cool woman. She wrote this book called Ants Among Elephants, which is, she traces the journey of her mother and her uncle in the book. She's writing about her mother who has boarded a train to go and get a degree from Banaras Hindu University. And she's the first woman in their family, in their generation, to go to a university for college, for degree. And she's in the train and she gets very thirsty. So she gets down at the platform to fill her water bottle with water. And she leaves the trunk with the suitcase and all its certificates in the train. And when she's filling the water, the train starts leaving. And she just starts running after the train, not because of anything, but because the certificates are in the train and she didn't want to be alone without the certificates. And Gidla writes about this scene with great intensity. And when I was reading it, I remember sitting up and feeling all tingly, because the way this woman ran on the platform, and what I found even more believable, more than anything else, was the fact that her water bottle was still in her hand. She didn't throw it away because the train was going. She held it in her hand and she ran and she ran and she ran. And then she got inside the train and went and sat. That scene was, it sort of came alive for me. And I'm thinking now what it means for a woman to run after a train, because she knows that what can ensure her future is in that train, the certificates and things like that. I don't know. Most of the women who ran for their freedom like this, I love reading their stories, because freedom becomes very real when I read stories like these. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that the necessity to make freedom more accessible to people may not always come from fighting for people's rights, which I don't think we should stop doing. There should be protests, there should be revolution, there should be activism. But there's also this side, and freedom is transferable. That's also a very puzzling quality about freedom. And it's transferable how? It's not some magic that I can go touch somebody and free them. I'm not some Sant Baba type person. That's not how freedom works. But you see how many people have convinced other people that I can make you free by touching you. But I think books, reading fiction, do the same thing for people, in the sense that they do transfer freedom. Frederick Douglass's autobiography allowed a lot of former slaves to feel free. And even though Douglass himself didn't know what to do with the freedom he'd fought for, it ensured that the people coming after him were able to touch it and go and get what he got. So this transferable quality of freedom, I think, is most found in fiction and non-fiction, and when people read. It's also something that freed, I like to believe in many ways, Dr. Ambedkar. In Waiting for Visa, he talks about how not having companionship moved him to the company of books. And he was stuck in an attic in a Parsi inn where he was living under a pseudonym. And he only read through the night, because he didn't know what else to do. And I think that kept him free in one very cursory way. And then he was later able to transfer that same freedom into his work, which is continuing to free many people today. That's the function of freedom, I think. I have a couple of more points to make, but I think I'll stop here, because I'd like to hear from you guys and see if you have any questions or if you have any comments about it. I think the surefire way of touching freedom at the moment for me is really to read fiction, non-fiction, whatever you get your hands on. I'm not sure if this is what I'm just trying to sort of present another nature to freedom, because so far the only sense of freedom we've gathered is a freedom that can come from constitution, from rights, from being able to protest, from being able to fight, from freedom of expression. And the freedom that I'm talking about is a more internal freedom. It can ensure a certain kind of liberation for you in your mind. It takes hard work, yes, definitely, like everything does. But the couple of other examples that I have in mind, I think can drive the point home in terms of why I think this freedom is just as essential as any other kind of freedom. The Because I think ultimately what we all want, especially those of us who are fighting caste, is to be able to live in a world, in a country where caste magically disappears. It's not there anymore. But I think the people practicing it have ensured that just us magically wishing it wasn't there isn't enough. So it's going to be there for a long time. It's here to stay. So in a situation like this, the only thing we can guarantee ourselves is the idea of bargaining for a kind of freedom that can be bought like this by investing in a life of mind, as they say, and fighting it in secret inward battles as well as outward battles. So I guess I'll stop here and wait for questions. If you don't have any questions, that's also okay. We can continue talking. Yes, Prajna, I think your hand is up.
Yeah, it is. Because I wanted to say, first of all, that it was a pleasure to listen to your voice, and I mean that literally. You have a beautiful speaking voice, but I also loved your voice metaphorically in the sense of the way it was inviting us into your stream of consciousness. And there were many things that resonated. Your refusal at 17 to serve food. I mean, I have an equivalent of it, and I will, as a 60-year-old, I will impose upon you my own version of the story, which was in a family gathering where men and women sat apart. My cousin and I decided that we must break the gender barrier. We sat on the other side for 10 minutes and it was excruciatingly boring. So we came right back. So, when you said that, I was taken right back to that room, that light, that twilight. And those are the sorts of things that are meaningful, I think, as you are trying to find your way between a vocabulary of politics and your experience and your agency at that point. So I think it's lovely that you narrated that. And then, I love the points you make about fiction. And I want to say that in my classes, I teach politics and international relations. I assign fiction as an important component because for exactly this reason, that it is liberating. It's an invitation into another experience. It's just, I mean, you actually don't even need a reason, but it perturbs me that a lot of people now tell me, younger people, I don't read fiction. I'm only interested in nonfiction. And I don't know at what point this became something virtuous or something that somehow sets you apart. Because if you don't read fiction, or for that matter, memoirs, biography, letters, you don't really have an entry point into another experience in quite the same way. So I enjoyed so much about this, and I'm so glad that we could finally get you to come. But I'm going to now step back and let others speak.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You asked some questions here, yeah.
Who actually has this ability to make us feel like touching the freedom? When we say fiction, what do you mean? Because like you said, you use the term loosely. Sometimes the fiction is told by a government. Now this is where I think we've made the mistake, and this is something that I think Prajna has just touched upon. It is our idea of fiction has changed so drastically that we are still thinking of it in gray and in black and white terms, in terms of what is fiction and what is real. Is fiction everything that is not real? I don't believe that fiction is lie, especially when it comes. I'm talking about it purely in terms of reading. I don't think our generation is reading enough anymore and reading fiction. Why I'm saying reading, when I say reading fiction, I mean fiction written by people who don't look like you, who don't sound like you, who are not like you, who have not experienced the world that we come from. Why am I saying this? I read Sidlingaya's Uru Keri, which is an autobiography, yes, but he's talking about a Bangalore which seemed very fictional to me. It's a very real book. It is set in Bangalore in the 80s, in the 70s, in the 90s, very real, but I'm reading it in 2020. And it seems like it's set in another world. Already there is a divide. But the way he talks about his experiences, and I say these, and when I say touching freedom, I don't think it has dangerous consequences at all. I think feeling freedom is the first step to fighting for freedom. You can't fight for something that you haven't felt. It even if it has dangerous consequences, I think it's a risk we should all be willing to take. What it means to touch freedom in your own hands, I don't think it's possible to provide everybody with freedom. It's not something that you can buy in shops. It's not something that you can get for 2 kg atta, 1 toothbrush free or 1 toothpaste free. It doesn't work like that. It's something that you have to fight for yourself. So this is my journey. This is how I found it. I found it by experiencing it in bursts. What it does, however, is produce a certain kind of restriction, a certain kind of limitation. Because when I say immediately reading fiction gives me freedom, I'm automatically, manually saying that literacy is a big component to such a freedom. Then am I saying that people who don't know how to read and write can never experience freedom? Which is probably why Ambedkar kept emphasizing on the role of education, on the role of reading and writing in freedom. I was at a conference organized by our university, my department last month, where the idea of multiliteracy came up. The idea of not allowing just reading and writing to define literacy, that there should be other modes in which literacies can be defined. Things like anything that people are good at should be considered literacy. So I come from a family where we are not great readers. My father reads, yes, but he comes from a family where no one read. It was able to produce something for me. And I do believe that teaching people to read and write is the beginning of one such freedom. Frederick Douglass himself taught himself how to read and write in a secret way, in that he wasn't, if the people who had encaptured him found out that he was reading and writing every day, they would have had him murdered. He learned how to do it in secrecy. And I think our history is replete with people who taught themselves how to read and write in a very secret kind of way. That is the first step to freedom. So yeah, I think that's what I would say. Are there any more questions?
There are no questions in the chat, but anybody wants to ask any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask, or any comments also you can make.
I think I'll make that last point now.
Please.
So I'm doing my PhD now. I have applied at my own university, and I'm doing my PhD on an American writer I happened to read by mistake during the pandemic. Her name is Dawn Powell. She wrote from the 1920s to the 1940s. She's pretty obscure in that every decade someone remembers her and reintroduces her work, and then people forget her. She wrote a lot about women who ran away from their homes, and this is what first tempted me to read more about her. I'm besotted with her at the moment because I think she never forgot what it's like to run away from home. And she did come from a family where her stepmother burned all her short stories because she hated that Dawn Powell used to write. So she said that her craft, something that she liked to do, had to be one that didn't make a lot of noise. Because if there was any noise, like if she was singing or dancing and it was a craft, her stepmother would come and stop it immediately. So she was forced to develop a craft and be absorbed in a craft that wouldn't make a lot of noise. Writing was one such craft because it didn't make noise and all the noise was internal. So she learned how to write there in secrecy and then ran away from home to become a writer. She never forgot what it's like to want to run away from home. And that was the beginning of freedom for Dawn Powell. Now, because I'm doing my PhD now, and when people ask me who are you doing it on, and I say Dawn Powell, and the first question they ask is she a white woman? And I say yeah, and then they look at me like with some kind of pity and like, oh, you're working on a white woman, like it's so passe or whatever. And the other question that they have for me is, don't you think you should be working on something more relevant, like maybe the interaction between race and caste? And I'm like, that interaction for me is every day. I don't have to do my PhD on it. It's not something that I have to learn at the moment. Some of them look at me with even more pity, and then they say something like, don't you at least want to work on a black woman? Why do you want to work on a white woman? But I hope what's visible here is the fact that in making a choice on working on a white woman, I'm exercising some kind of freedom. I'm refusing to work on Indian women, black women, Dalit women, all women, and I've chosen a white woman deliberately because I seem to have learned something from her, and I want to know what it is that I've learned from her. So I won't let anybody make me feel guilty for it. I've heard people say things like, you probably are one among the first Dalit women to now go mad over a white woman. At least tell people that you're working on black women, so at least it will be relevant to your life. But do you see what happens there? In making such a choice, in making such a leap, the freedom is questioned, the freedom is withheld, the freedom is challenged. But that's what I think my body is responding to. There is a sense of great spirit in Dawn Powell's short stories, which my body is responding to. I'm reading her fiction and I'm feeling free. Why? I don't think it's and I think that's, I'm not able to understand it. Where does the spirit to do physical things come from when you experienced it only in words? That I'm curious about. So even with the woman who left her 28-year-old marriage after reading K.R. Meera's story, where is it coming from? Why are people moved to big decisions after reading? I know of stories that my students tell me when I give them Waiting for a Visa to read, or when I give them one of Dawn Powell's short stories to read. They're tempted to make decisions. They're tempted to make decisions that allow them to bargain for their freedom in some way. I think words have great power in that sense. And that's why I think I wish I'd learned how to read much earlier in my life. I learned to read only very, very late in my life after I started teaching. But all around me, there are young men and women in my classes who are reading, who are giving into that kind of freedom. So I think inside of the narrative of caste, it's essential that we push our students, our children, our grandchildren to read more than anything else. It can guarantee a kind of internal freedom that isn't easy to get, even if you get all the other freedoms in the world. I know many people who are very free in their lives, who live alone, who make good money and who are in decent, respectable jobs, etc. But when I hang out with them, I constantly feel like they're still trapped, that they're not free, that they still don't make the choices that they want to make, that they're still responding in some way to a template of freedom that's written elsewhere. That kind of internal freedom can't be won by being political, or only by being political. I think that kind of internal freedom can be won by figuring out what gives you joy and then clicking on that button endlessly. And this is the language and the vocabulary which I think anti-caste discourse is yet to figure out. The journey of what it is that gives you joy, what it is that gives you pleasure. Because our struggle against caste has been so rooted in the political that we haven't looked at it any other way now. But I think the surest way of being anti-caste at the moment is to chase your joys. Can anybody say that joy is not anti-caste? Nobody will be able to say that. Joy is definitely anti-caste. And I think that kind of joy for me has come from all these things that I've talked about. I think I've answered Shweta Phillips' question. Want to know what your thoughts are on the idea of love and freedom. Yeah, I think joy, love, are all definitely anti-caste in nature. And I think pursuing it single-mindedly can get us to that internal freedom more than anything else can.
I think you're pointing to a very important component of privilege, which is the right to choose to write about a white woman, or the right to read fiction that is not overtly political, the right to indulge in pleasurable activities. Because if you are, I think, if you are in a social location where everything is fraught and everything has to be fought for, then the pressure must be overwhelming to always be single-mindedly on that track. And the privilege of sauntering through a variety of reading and other experiences, I mean, is definitely something that we don't even think and write about very much. I mean, we do it in the context of why loiter, women can be in public spaces or not, but I haven't given that much thought to. I mean, I understand access is an issue of privilege, but also, as you say, choosing to do something because it gives you joy, and then having to defend it.
This
being
is
in
a
a
conversation I've had with so many people. And the one thing that they always say when I bring up this idea of joy is that, but it takes only someone who has that kind of privilege can take access to joy. But I'm saying that even choosing to, like, I know a bunch of, if we are putting pressure on Bahujan students to be more politically aware, but not aware of themselves, why are we also not seeing that even to be politically aware, it needs a certain kind of access? Not all of the Bahujan or Dalit students that I teach have the time to be at protests, because they have to. Some of them are Amazon executive delivery boys. Some of them are Swiggy executive delivery boys, so they have to run after class and start their jobs. And there are these other classmates who judge them for not showing up for protests. They're like, we are there protesting for you and you're not there. I'm like, listen, boss, I don't have time to protest. My life is the protest. I have to go for my job. Otherwise, I won't get my day's salary today. And here at this point, I think this was in the year 2016, 17, I'm not sure, one of those years, when there was a huge hangama in class because a bunch of boys and girls who were not all Bahujan, but they were of an equal mix, they all decided to go watch Bahubali on the same day of some protest at town hall. And then there was this huge divide in class. You would much rather care about Bahubali. You don't come for protest. But you see what the boys did and girls did there. In choosing to go to Bahubali, they have expressed a certain kind of choice, a certain kind of freedom. Now, can freedom... Now, the question they were asking is, you're fighting for my freedom at town hall, but I already feel free because I've gone and watched Bahubali. Why are you fighting for my freedom? But don't you see that this is what I want? I want to go and watch Bahubali instead of coming for the protest. So why can't I go? So I think when people make the case that only people with a certain kind of access or location can have the privilege of experiencing joy, I'm saying politics or being politically aware is also coming from the same privilege. So if you can have access to that, why can't you turn around and have access to this also? Why can't you have both?
You must have both.
Yeah. So, and I know people also who say that the one way in which they became politically aware is by choosing their joy over and over again. And today, I think joy is protest. I've taken a look at I'm coming back from a talk at London where I met a Dalit girl who says she'd spent the last 25 years of her life feeling very guilty because she wasn't able to call herself Dalit in London. Because she's in university, she has scholarship, almost as if the idea of Dalit is so related to suffering that she must show her suffering credentials to be able to be called Dalit. So I said, if you flaunt your aliveness, why can't that also be a quality of being there? That you're flaunting your joy, you're flaunting your aliveness. And this is something that I've always said. People like it if there are more dead Dalit people than alive Dalit people. Because you're not a good Dalit if you're alive. You're not a good Dalit if you're enjoying your life. You're an excellent Dalit if you're dead. And other people can fight for your lives. And other people can fight for your rights. But we need stories of these, of people who are asserting their lives, or who are very happy of deciding that this is where my joy comes from and this is what I'll do. I think those narratives we need.
There is one more question.
Oh, Paro is here. Hi. Deciding where politics exists, what the curriculum of politics is, and what form it should take is eventually a great exercise of privilege. Yes, because it is an act of control. Joy is open-ended, so it feels impossible to control and hence is discouraged. Yes, perfect. I think people get very anxious if how politics is expressed doesn't follow a template. And I think we don't have any more questions, no?
Yeah, we don't have any more questions. Yes. So actually, it was.
Yeah.
I have a question. Somebody has a question. Paramita.
What do you feel about sobriety? Wait, I'm not sure if I'm understanding in the same way you intended it. Do you mean like to be sober? I'm an English teacher, but some of these words sometimes just confuse me. So, not alcohol-wise, okay. Sobriety, in what wise then? By behaving in a sober fashion. I'll give you an example, but I don't know if this is what your question is. We were mentoring a couple of underprivileged students, and I noticed a Dalit boy who was doing quite badly, and then we decided to sort of help him out and things like that. And whatever monetary help we gave him, he was sort of able to manage with that. But the next couple of evenings, a colleague of mine came and told me, see, you're giving him money, but he's spending it all on hanging out with his friends. He's talking to girls. Like, why can't Dalit boys talk to girls now? Just because he's suffering and struggling, he can't hang out with friends and drink or whatever. That came to my mind. But I think you are asking about behaving in a sober fashion in terms of politics, in terms of joy. I don't know. I think some of the students who have left me confused in the classroom are often students who want to be left alone, who are Dalit but don't want joy, don't want politics also, who just want to get their degree certificates and get home. There are students like that also, and they always puzzle me because, sometimes I think I also have the savior kind of behavior where I want to save everybody, and they give me a nice slap to my face. They're saying things like, you don't try to save us, we are fine on our own, we are just here to get our degree certificates, we'll take it and go, you be in your lane, we'll be in our lane. And that's something I think I can respect. I respect people who want to be left alone. So yeah.
Yeah, actually, this is really excellent. So I have no words to express. I had several questions, but you were correctly answered in a coherent way. So I don't have any questions left out to ask you actually. So no, it was really good. So yeah, so your answers with anecdotes is itself is a fiction kind of reading, I can say. So yeah, this is excellent. Thank you for spending your time with us today.
Thank you so much.